Hi, I'm Dr. Mikah Sellers, and welcome to Forces of Change.
And I'm Annie Graziani. I'm co-host of Forces of Change. Well, Micah, today we have a bit of an unusual conversation, right, to be had here.
Absolutely.
We're 9 episodes in. We've had some incredible guests. We've talked to futurists. We've talked to military commanders, sleep scientists, cybersecurity experts, economists, all over the place, right? Healthcare experts. Pretty much every single conversation has come back to the same tension, which is really about what's going on in the meta crisis. Like, what are we really facing? Back to the forces of change, the purpose of this entire podcast. So where do you want to go from here? Let's just like set the stage on what to expect of this particular conversation as we kind of take a state of the podcast.
First, Annie, when I first envisioned this, yeah, I didn't think it would be as challenging as it is. Actually, it's really challenging, as you're well aware. Just orchestrating guests, the outreach that you have to do to get guests, scheduling, it's all terribly challenging. But it's also really rewarding. One of the things I have really, really enjoyed so far, and that I anticipated, is the opportunity to have conversations with people who are way smarter than me on really, really interesting topics that are changing the nature of society today, right? The nature of humanity. We're seeing this, and we'll talk about this as we kind of dive into the threads that we're seeing across all these episodes. But I think we've had some really remarkable conversations, and I'm really excited for what's to come. But before we get there, let's talk about where we've been over the course of the last 9 episodes. I think that one of the first things that we've seen across all of these conversations is the idea of AI as infrastructure level disruption, and we're experiencing that day to day, right? We're seeing that in our workplaces, in our homes. It's being covered by basically every outlet out there. A lot of people are having these conversations, and I think we're really just at the very beginning of this interesting revolution that we're seeing with AI. What are your thoughts in terms of what we've seen in these conversations, what we've heard rather in these conversations with guests to date?
Yeah, I think the different applications of AI is kind of like loud in my memory of all the conversations, how it's actually being deployed and and the extremes to which it's being deployed, right? Like when we talk about autonomous warfare, that these kinds of things, all the way down to business disruption and covering mundane tasks and what how that's shifting the workforce. So it really is kind of a massive wave that absolutely deserves the amount of attention it's gotten across all the episodes that we've had. The biggest concern I think that you and I have been kind of pondering is how do we corral this? Like, how do we kind of harness what AI is going to be, and then what is the place of it in the future of all these, all the different applications of where, how it's shifting our world. So, in my world, it is very much about the workforce. What is it? What is the place of AI in business application? And, so many of the people that I've been talking with in my research are very concerned about, how is it going to shift their work. So, we had this terrific conversation with Payush on the topic of upskilling and the gap and what job opportunities will exist in the future. And also there's this concept of like knowledge transfer and wisdom sharing across the different generations, what deserves to stay, what needs to be transferred and to the younger generations. And it's sort of like, where's AI in the place of all of that? So that I sort of I don't know, I sort of like honor those parts of how it's shifting the human experience in workplace application. But yeah, I'm kind of curious about your perspective too, from in your background as a veteran, somebody who understands the application in warfare, especially in the past couple of weeks, what's been going on globally. Curious about your
Well,
perspective on
it's
that.
interesting that you kind of had those two very different kind of vectors, right? One is, we've had conversations on AI and its applications in autonomous warfare, and we've also had conversations about AI and the disruption in the workforce. And in just the last week, right, we've seen this play out. We saw a very public food fight, between the administration and the folks at Anthropic, and then
Right.
the subsequent deal that they just made with OpenAI, which was ironically the same deal that Anthropic was asking for nonetheless. But we then saw that they actually did use Anthropic's technology in some of these strikes, which,
Mhm.
for better or for worse, right? I think for me, it's kind of scary, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of questions that I have, which we'll bring up the second topic that we've seen in all these conversations, which is the human in the loop, right? Where does the human stay in the
Mhm.
loop as we're deploying AI, whether it's in autonomous warfare or in the workplace? And the last week we also saw Jack Dorsey come out and make some very, very public statements after a 40% riff at Block. 40% of the workforce.
Right.
If I memory serves me, it was 4,000 people that just lost their jobs. And he said very, very specifically, based on the introduction of agents that can do the work better, faster, cheaper. And he also said that, uh, he is one of many CEOs in his circles that are facing these challenges to make these very, very tough decisions, and he suspects that many, many more will be riffed across the enterprise, across the Fortune 500 in the course of the next, 6
Mhm.
to 8 months.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how this gets directed to preserve, the workplace. It's not necessarily we're going to keep the jobs that these 4,000 people that just sort of were laid off because of agentic AI being able to do that work. It's like where do we put those 4,000 people? So I am kind of going back to the Payush conversation yet again about we haven't even prepared them and they're already out of the workforce. But there's an impact to our economy, our competition globally from an economic standpoint. So curious your thoughts, what your thoughts
Yeah,
are on that.
that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, literally, because I have monkey brain, and I'm always thinking. And, one of the things I'm often thinking about is, yeah, the advent of AI is going to create a whole new wave of opportunities. Because I try to remain optimistic about what AI is going
Mhm.
to bring to humanity, as opposed to kind of going down the rabbit hole of AI is evil and it's going to kill everybody. Um, AI will create new jobs. Unfortunately, so far we haven't seen what those new jobs are. And one of the things that I find
Mhm.
most troubling is that the people at the seats of power, right? The seats of political power, in addition to the people who are in power in corporate America, are not having those conversations. They're not having the conversations about what do we do, right? What do we do when 40% of Block does get laid off? Where do those people go?
Mhm.
We know that that they're only going to be measured for a brief period of time when they're on the unemployment rolls. Unemployment insurance doesn't last forever. People roll off of that. So what we're seeing, what I'm concerned by, is as these waves of reductions in force happen, people get lost in the wash because eventually they're no longer counted on the unemployment rolls, and then they become long term
Mhm.
unemployed. And I think we need to find some solutions, and pretty quickly, to address some of these challenges because these waves of reductions will not stop. AI is just going to get better. It is. I mean, it's happening, faster than we could possibly imagine. The cycles of innovation in AI outpace anything we've seen in history. You know, to go from version 17.2 to 17.3 happens in a day, right? It's real
Mhm.
time learning, real time adaptation. So I think companies who have been hesitant up to this point, to kind of turn the reins over on certain functions, are starting to become less hesitant because AI is getting that much better, and the
Mhm.
applicability in the workforce is getting that much better. So I do think Dorsey's right. I think over the course of the next 6, 8, 12 months, we're going to see some significant shifts, tectonic shifts, in the Fortune 500 as it relates to the size and scale of their workforce.
Yeah, and so, I'm thinking about we haven't really heard this much in any of the conversations, but I'm thinking about the power of blue collar work now, right? Like jobs that maybe will be more facilitated but won't go away because of
Oh,
AI,
100%. I mean,
right?
you know, I literally just had a conversation yesterday with a really good friend of mine, who is in franchising. He's a multi-franchise owner, and we were talking about
Mhm.
kind of the AI is actually going to drive, I believe, a wave of solopreneurship and entrepreneurship. Solopreneurship in the sense that, people who are displaced, I think, will become kind of higher end gig workers, right? So, if you were,
Mhm.
mid-level management, in finance or accounting, in the Fortune 500 and you get riffed, there's a good chance, you're going to become a solopreneur, hang out your own shingle, do gig work, maybe working for, small and mid-sized businesses in a more distributed fashion. Um, and it'll also drive a new wave of entrepreneurship. And as we were talking about entrepreneurship, I was like, there's a lot of AI proof, things in your field. This friend of mine, whether
Mhm.
it's Mr. Sparky or, a company that does home remodeling or home renovation or plumbing or electric, any kind of trade, and there's a lot of them out there. Yeah, AI is not going to come and change the fan in your room or rewire your electrical sockets. I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, eventually we'll get to the point maybe where the robots are able to do that, but
Robots, right.
we're a long way away from that. Um, we're not a long way
Mhm.
away from humanoid robots. We're a long way away from robots that can do that complex level task. So I think, there are a lot of AI proof careers. Going back to the regulatory discussion, the policy discussion, that's a big part of it, right? As people are displaced, because we know we have a deficit right now, a huge deficit in this
Mhm.
country of skilled tradesmen, which is being
Mhm.
exacerbated by, we agree not to get too political in this show, but we're deporting a lot of people who are doing trade work. So, there's
Right.
that deficit only got worse. So when you look at the political landscape, where are the conversations about how we reinvest in America, where we reinvest in reskilling and upskilling for people who are being displaced, but may have the opportunity to get a really, really well-paying job in a trade. Or, you
Mhm.
know, um, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are investing heavily right now and in the last few years, in their education. Going through getting 4-year degrees and then graduating and finding basically crickets in the marketplace. There are a lot of people who have
Mhm.
graduated from college in the last 2 years who are still looking for work, for that first job after college, and in some cases, in some career fields, that might not change for quite a while, in terms of the
Mhm.
lack of vacancies that are out there, for these people. So I think there is a need for government intervention, for some level of government funding, to help to shift them into a new career field so that they can be a benefit to society. They can, and for their own, mental health, right? I mean, let's face it, if when you're out there and you're
Yeah.
underemployed or unemployed, it is really, really tough mentally. And I think that's also leading, to a lot of anxiety. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the articles, in the last couple of months, but a lot of people are talking about America the anxious, America being a very anxious society, and that level of anxiety is continuing to grow for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it shows up in my research all the time. Almost every participant, right, is sharing this intensity of the workplace in their lives, but also like the need that they're compelled that they have to do it. They have to basically either find a different job, which is now getting the market's tight, or they have to put up with whatever they're dealing with at work, and it could be basically abusive. So it's a really uncomfortable kind of place where we're finding ourselves, and we all kind of like drank the Kool-Aid, right, so to speak. We did, many of us did go for college degrees, and we're indebted to that investment, and now we can't get the jobs to, especially the younger generations, right, can't get the jobs to kind of to maneuver that, and so then and as the cost of living is, and I don't want to go down too far down this path either of the economics of it all, but it's the cost of living is increasing, and who's going to, how are we going to take care of the people who basically bought into what they thought was going to be security, especially in computer science fields, right, which is now much replaced by AI. It kind of went away. We had this momentum going, right, and then now it's sort of like, oh, a sudden halt on that, and we're shifting gears. So it's concerning. They're really, it's we need to get another economist on the show, right? So we can talk about what that looks like and and how we're shaping where this is all going. Micah, let's move to trust erosion as a meta crisis. Let's just talk about it, right? Let's just talk very candidly about what's going on in our broader society in this critical moment where we are in human history and trust.
It's really, really topical and timely. We're seeing a massive erosion in trust in society today, and some of that, is being driven by AI. Don't believe what your eyes see, and don't believe what your ears hear. Right? We're seeing, the application, right, of AI in deep fakes across the internet. You really can't, visit many social sites today. I was, for example, yesterday on X, and the volume of content, right, that is being produced by Grok, that's very questionable, is insane.
Mhm.
And we're seeing that, you know in almost every sector of society. And I think that is eroding trust when you don't know what to believe because the content that is being generated is fake. It is disinformation, and it's being weaponized. We're seeing AI weaponized in many parts of society, and that is scary, and that is eroding trust.
Yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how we're going to redirect back to trust, right? Where we can at least start with, rippling this out from our own, from our own individual communities, right, to our workplaces and work leadership trust, and starting there, kind of getting back to center on who humans are to each other and how we behave together in society, and then the rest sort of maybe it ripples out from there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, AI is just one aspect of the deep erosion of trust, right? We're seeing this
Sure.
just across society. But like, take for example, we were just talking about higher education. You know, for my entire lifetime, right? It's been you work really hard in high school, you go off to college, you put in your 4 years of really hard work, and you're going to land in society with a great job. You're going to land in the
Right.
age of opportunity. You're going to work hard. You're going to buy a house. You're going to have some kids. Everything's going to be great. We've seen all that in the last 15 to 20 years really fall apart, right?
Very
The
disrupted.
you know
Yeah.
the paradigm that we had, when our parents were coming up is not the paradigm that we experienced. So the paradigm we experienced is definitely not what we're seeing for our children, and will be very different for their children. So I think, when people are graduating from college now, and there is a lack of opportunity, and the promises that were made are broken, that erodes trust. When people get into the workforce and they're struggling and they're working hard over the course of 10 years and they still can't, that erodes trust. I think there's so many
Mhm.
things that are happening today in society, right, that are needling at the trust that we have, um, with each other, with our social contract, is eroding.
Mhm.
And I think there are ways around this, right? There are ways to reverse course, but I think right now what I'm seeing is, 2 things. One is a lack of imagination in terms of how we address these problems, and 2, a lack of will, a lack of commitment to actually doing it.
Mhm. Yeah, I wonder around, or I think about too like what we've tolerated as a society as like a standard, right? Like who we are as a people in American society, and if we tolerated and rested on our laurels for too long, that we forgot to practice the muscle of critical thinking, of creative thinking, and so we've leaned into this echo chamber of what social media platforms share with us, or the news outlets that we selectively kind of like choose to listen to, and then that's all been sort of it's much more loudly kind of distrusted, right? Because of all the conversation, not to get into politics, but like, the elections and how we're kind of being fed because of algorithms, right? What we want to hear, what we think we want to hear, or how we're kind of tugged in one direction or another based on, what we click on or whatever. All these things, it's just, we don't even really know what to trust anymore. And so, I think we're kind of waiting for someone to come in here or somebody to come in and say, like, okay, well, this is the truth, right? Like this is actually the reality we all live in. And that is it feels so far from where we are right now. It's like, what do you really want to hear?
You're so right, Annie, and I think we've heard this right across many of the conversations we've had. The kind of economic inequality as a challenge, right? The wealth concentration as a challenge, and
Hmm.
I am right there with you. I think it is a lack of imagination. I can't fathom that humanity can send a rocket to the moon and land a man on the moon. That we can create a artificial intelligence that will soon supersede human intelligence, that is,
Hmm.
you know, able to accomplish tasks in a fraction of the time that it takes humans to accomplish them. That we are on the precipice of launching, humanoid robots into society, but we can't solve economic inequality. That
Hmm.
baffles my mind.
Yeah, and I don't really think it has, I think there's a little bit of there can be a little bit of like a laziness argument here or willingness argument too, but I really think it goes back to the confusion of I don't know where to put my effort, right? Like, what do I believe in so that I can pour my effort into that thing so that I can have a truth center to rally around. And you know, then I can like contribute my best self to society. So then I'm thinking now about like human purpose, right? So it really kind of goes back to we talked about this quite a bit ago here in this episode about, human purpose. Like how do we whittle it away right down to what's most important about human society? And how we interact with each other and what we're all really here for. And then all these things maybe start to make a little bit of sense, but there's not like a straight and arrow there telling us, like this is the way.
Right, and I think that's, again, when we kind of look at all these different forces, whether it's, mistrust in society, the level of economic inequality, the waves of technological innovation, there all these vectors kind of come together at some point. And one of the questions, that I keep, asking myself is, will this what I think is a relatively amazing wave of innovation, that is rippling across our society, will it democratize things? Will it
Hmm.
democratize access, right, to opportunity? Will it democratize access to a better quality of life, right? Maybe that's, borne out in shorter work weeks, right, for the same or more money. Um,
Hmm.
or will the powers that be, right, that are funding and driving these waves of change, lever it, right, for their own ends, and ultimately, right, that will have a negative effect on society. I try to lean into the optimism, right, that it will be, immensely beneficial, to humans and to society, but there's a part of me that, fears that it can be used for the ulterior, or for the opposite, as is what I'm getting
Hmm.
at, the opposite purposes.
Yeah, I mean, the pendulum I feel goes so far in one direction before, humans start to say, okay, let's pull it back. Let's pull it back to center. Let's kind of get back to, treating each other with dignity and respect. And but at the same time, it does feel like we've kind of settled into what is that? We don't even maybe we're not certain necessarily, right? We feel it. We feel it that it's intense right now,
Oh,
right?
100%. I think, and I've seen, this is not just an Amer right? We're seeing this, in almost every,
Hmm.
Western society out there right now, across the European Union, in Oceania. I'm not as familiar with how this is playing out in Asia, but, over like the last 10 years, we have seen, a deterioration in civility.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see eventually a return to civility.
Yep.
in our discourse, right? As it relates to these very, very important, very topical issues, because we can become very polarized very quickly, right? Whether we're talking about, how AI is shifting and transforming the nature of work or the future of work, to the challenges that we face with inequality, those can become polarized conversations, and I think we do need some return to civility, in order to have the conversation in such a fashion that it leads to productive outcomes.
Micah, let's talk about the books that have been recommended over the course of the 9 episodes. So the one that came up twice is called The Coming Wave. And I thought maybe this would be a nice way for us to end today's conversation, just so we have, we rattle off the books that have been recommended. So the first one is called The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman. In our first episode, we had 2 book recommendations, right? One of which is your book. So the Kiplinger letter, and then Forging Emotional Intelligent Leaders. That's your book.
Yep. Well, I think the coming wave is a phenomenal book, and I think anybody who's listening to it who would read it would find it incredibly invaluable. I think I did say to our guest that you know I think it should have been named the coming tsunami because that's really what this
Mhm.
is. It's not the wave of change that we're seeing is very, very different than the waves we've seen throughout human
Mhm.
history, right? Whether it's the shift from farming to the industrial to information, to the kind of web 2.0, e-commerce, and
Mhm.
now what we're seeing with AI, it's a very different shift. And I think a lot of the points that are made in that book are very well made, incredibly insightful, and helped me better understand some of the potential the potential impacts, but also the causation.
Mm.
I really value the book recommendations that our guests have made. It's added to my already increasingly growing list of books that I do need to read. We all struggle to find time to read, but it's super important, right, that we continue enriching ourselves, right, by learning, by reading, by exploring topics that are both you know, right in front of us in terms of the challenges we're facing in society, but then at the same time, reading things that are off topic. I find that to
Mhm.
be really enriching in my ability to think critically, is to look for topics that I could read on that I'm completely unfamiliar with.
And to complement, find those connections, right, across the subject matter.
For sure. It's been a journey so far, but I'm really looking forward to where this goes.
Thanks, Micah. Thank you for listening to Forces of Change. If you found this conversation valuable, follow us at forcesofchange.fm and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep questioning and learning about the forces of change among us.